Black men, I have told you and will continue to tell you that you are in a media war and that the images are the ammunition. For the last few years, there's been a lot of talk in Hollywood about making a biopic about Dr. King. A number of well-known directors, including Steven Spielberg, have thrown their hats into the ring, lobbying for this high-profile dream job. But there's been something holding it up. White supremacy. You see, even though Dr. King is a public figure and as such you can legally make a movie about him however you want, the problem is Dr. King was wise enough to copyright all his speeches and letters, and this includes his I Have a Dream speech. The licensing rights to that material are in the hands of his heirs, and they have been very selective about who they let use their father's work. It's extremely difficult to make a movie about Dr. King if you can't use his words. Or is it? You see, in the last couple of years there have been some directors who want to make a movie about Dr. King, but they don't care about his words, because for them, they only want to do it so they can make a dramatization of the FBI-generated lies that King was committing adultery. The worst offender so far has been Paul Greengrass. This was the guy who made those shaky cam Jason Bourne movies. He also made a craptacular movie about how the U.S. totally botched the invasion of Iraq. In his mind, he thinks he's some sort of important filmmaker, but in the real world, he's an overrated action movie hack. And the same can now be said about Oliver Stone. He hasn't had a hit since Any Given Sunday, and he is clearly desperate to fool someone into thinking he might still be relevant in cinema. He wanted to make a movie about Dr. King, but only if he could throw in the lies about adultery. And he had this to say about the people stopping him from perverting Dr. King's memory. I fear if they ever make it, it'll be just another commemoration of the March on Washington. I want you to think about that. Think about Dr. King's sermons in Louisiana, or his bus boycotts, or his march in Selma, or his speech in Washington, or his defiance of LBJ and the war in Vietnam, or his Poor People's Revolution. But for white filmmakers, all that is boring and uninteresting. It's sexual gossip that interests them. But why? Everybody knows that people in America, and in fact the world, get their knowledge of history from movies. This is why, even though he was a rabid anti-black racist, people think Gandhi was some sort of gentle, kind soul who loved everyone, when in fact he hated black people with a passion. Because the first time most people outside of India even heard of Gandhi was after Richard Attenborough's movie starring Ben Kingsley. In Attenborough's alternate reality, Gandhi was a colorblind post-racialist. You better not underestimate how important movies are to shaping the world. White filmmakers and their allies on the internet certainly don't, and they intend to create a deliberately false reimagining of Dr. King's life for that sole purpose. In fact, these white directors are on a war footing about it. They're angry, rabid, and at this point nearly deranged. And they're being backed to the hilt by the biggest and most influential critics on the internet. Read what white movie makers and bloggers are saying about Dr. King. This is Deadline Hollywood. It's the single most important website on the internet for industry news. It was started by Nikki Fink, who ran it until late last year when she was run out of her own website. She never missed a chance to snipe at black filmmakers and audiences, and she absolutely reveled in defending Hollywood's color-coded business practices. And she staffed her website with several like-minded individuals, none of whom were black. Today, her website is owned by mega-millionaire Jay Penske, who is also another class act. And if you thought things might change under his regime, guess again. One of the website's writers, Mike Fleming, has been on a one-man jihad to get a King as Adulterer movie made, and he passionately cheerleads anyone willing to make it. As we get closer to the Dr. King Day of 2014, Fleming predictably has been hoping his website might help jumpstart the King smear piece of his dreams. Remember, this website is arguably the most influential film industry news site in the world. And look at what they use their influence to do. Here's another one. Jeffrey Wells. He's one of the better-known film critics, and today he runs a very well-known film blog. On April 5th, 2011, he ran a piece discussing Andrew Young's opposition to Paul Greengrass's would-be anti-King propaganda piece. You'll notice the piece he highlights is one of Mike Fleming's idiotic missives. Wells figured that nobody would question his shameless defaming of King, but people did. Post after post demanded that if Wells was going to viciously attack Andrew Young and the King family, then he must present evidence that King was an adulterer. But rather than present evidence, Wells instead resorted to empty denials. First, he said no reasonably well-informed adult would say the King rumors were total lies, this from a guy who presents no information on this whatsoever. Then he goes on to typify those who demand historical accuracy as a denial brigade, this from a man whose only defense has been empty denials. Finally, he can't contain himself, and he simply must say what's on his mind. You know what I love about the alleged FBI reports he wrote? And what for me gives King an interesting dimension and humanity? The allegations that he liked white women. I'm very enamored of those reports, rumors, whatever, however true or untrue. There it is, in plain English. Jeffrey Wells didn't care about Dr. King's marches, his sacrifices, his triumphs, or anything else of his life. Wells doesn't recognize King's valor, his historical importance, or even his basic humanity. In Wells's sick mind, the only purpose for making a movie about Dr. King would be so he could get his jollies at interracial porn. In the end, Wells decided to start deleting the posts that didn't agree with him. Still don't believe that whites see themselves as being at war against you? It's not that they don't know the adultery rumors aren't true. They know it's a complete lie, and that's the whole point. Thomas Jefferson raped Sally Hemings for 30 years. He enslaved the very children he had by her. He even went so far as to take one of his biracial daughters and sell her to a plantation in Louisiana. See, there's a reason why Showtime made a mini-series about John Adams and not George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, because Adams was the closest thing to a decent human being the founders of the U.S. had. Black men better start paying attention to this and start fighting back, because as I told you in my last video about lying statistics, we sat back during the first 10 years of the new millennium and let the white trolls cut and paste the same fraudulent statistics about so-called black violent crime. We allowed message boards from Yahoo to the New York Times to become billboards where their talking points were pasted daily. And today we have news anchors repeating those lies word for word live on air. The internet has become a testing ground for white hate speech. If they can get away with it online, then they move these talking points onto the broadcast media. Read the columns these white bloggers write. They know that what they're promoting is complete fiction, but they don't care. They sound word perfect, exactly like what you find on any white supremacist website. Now, for those of you who don't study history, listen up. White America's problem with Dr. King is rooted in the civil rights movement itself. The leaders of the civil rights movement faced white America with a huge problem. First, white people were being forced to see their own venal nature. Secondly, the men who did it were largely from the clergy. Vernon Johns, Malcolm X, Dr. King, and many others. Black men placed the civil rights struggle on the same side of God himself. So, white people felt they had to fight back somehow. The first was J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI thugs, backed by Attorney General Robert Kennedy and his brother, President John Kennedy. They understood that black men had successfully framed the civil rights struggle as a moral war, and black men had taken the moral high ground. Their strategy was to undermine the moral ground that these black men stood on. That's where the whisper campaigns originated. Only problem was they didn't have any proof. So they decided they'll just make it up, which they did. They would call Dr. King's home and have agents pretend to be civil rights activists who knew about Dr. King's affairs. The target of the whisper campaigns was not Dr. King. It was his wife. The FBI's goal was to put enough pressure on Coretta Scott King that she would leave Martin, because if that happened, it would have cast a cloud over King's moral standing. Even as a lie, people would have bought it. They would have said, why else would Coretta have left him unless she knew that he was unfaithful to her? But Coretta didn't fall for this trick, because she, like all of King's other allies, knew it was a total lie. Today, the only people who still repeat this pathetic urban legend are white people. And if you talk to them, it only takes about 5 seconds before they go from Dr. King wasn't a saint to the black community should be exterminated. And if this sounds like what they did to Barack Obama in 2008 and later Trayvon Martin, you're dead on the money. This cut-and-paste smear strategy is a classic of white supremacy. Their smear campaign against King is only one of many battlefields they're fighting their race war upon. Even today, you have white people who claim to have seen or heard audio or film or video or eyewitnesses or something to corroborate these King adultery lies. But have you ever noticed how not even one of them can produce any evidence? All the white journalists and white reporters and white lawyers and white schemers and liars, and not even one of them has been able to come up with a single shred of evidence. Not a single photo, not a single stray hair, not a single second of a recording, nothing. They can't even produce any of the women who they claim King slept with. Or are we to believe these women were also part of some black conspiracy to protect Dr. King's reputation? As with history, as with statistics, as with pretty much everything, white people don't have any proof, and they never will. Some of them are clinging to the pathetic hope that maybe the FBI will one day declassify some evidence sometime in the distant future. For any of you white people watching this, desperately holding on to this talking point, allow me to take it away from you. Dr. King died in 1968. J. Edgar Hoover, the man who orchestrated the Whisper campaign against King and who almost certainly orchestrated his death, was still alive and still head of the FBI in 1968. Hoover was also alive and running the FBI in 1969, and 1970, and 1971, and 1972. In all those years, Hoover still controlled the FBI with an iron grip. If the FBI had had any evidence King was an adulterer, are we seriously supposed to believe that the man who hated King most and had the most to gain from King's being exposed as a moral failure would have sat on that evidence while King was alive and even after his death? Hoover surveilled King for the better part of a decade, throughout the 60s, and he outlived King by a half-decade more, yet Hoover never produced any evidence of a King adultery. I guess Hoover must have been afraid of Al Sharpton, huh? Even the pretend-to-be white liberals sound pathetic when they try to defend it. Their line is that, well, JFK slept around. Tell us then, when has Hollywood produced a movie about JFK sleeping with Marilyn Monroe, or any other woman for that matter? But Hollywood's biggest directors don't dare dramatize that. Oliver Stone was the one who made the JFK movie, but did you notice that it was about the aftermath of the JFK assassination? And not one frame of that movie had anything to do with the rumors that Kennedy was a drug addict, which he was, or that he was a womanizer. And you didn't see Stone accusing himself of suffocating the truth. I have something to say to all the white bloggers and filmmakers who are waging their war on Dr. King's memory. You're right when you say that Dr. King is treated as a saint. You want to know why? Because he was. And he is lionized because he was a courageous man. I know it infuriates you that any black man is held in higher esteem than a white one, but morality and merit produces that, while white privilege does not. We could hand the world to you for 1,000 years and retake it in a single day. When you look at Dr. King, you fear him because our heroes slay true demons, the worst monsters the world had ever seen. You hate that our heroes defeated true evil, and the evil they defeated was you. The last comments I direct at intelligent black men. This is not about Dr. King. The target is and always has been you, black man. These are the ridiculous ends that white supremacy has driven white people to. They openly admit they know it's a total lie, but they are utterly dependent on the lie. They simply can't let it go. Jamie Foxx, a long-rumored homosexual himself, will have what's left of his soul tested as his white Hollywood masters attempt to have him lend his name to their smear piece. And Ava DuVernay, who's already let Lee Daniels, another Hollywood homosexual, talk her into directing a movie about Dr. King, will prove that she's Tinseltown's favorite mammy. Who wants to see the guy who made Precious get his hands on Dr. King's memory? But the true culprits in all this are black men ourselves. We know the game being played against us, and I would love to say that our mistake is that we're playing a weak defense, but that's a lie. The problem is we're not putting forth a play at all. We're sitting back and letting the scum of the earth run the boards on us, and that is not okay. Tell me something. Have you seen any black men anywhere say what I've said? Have you seen any highlight the blatantly obvious connections between online media and mainstream media? I name names and tell you how the machinery of white supremacy works, but until other black men decide to do the same, we can never mount the kind of substantive counterattack that we need. We're in a war for our survival, a war that we are losing, and we are sitting back wanting someone else to do our fighting for us. We're focusing on dating, music, and sports, while our oppressors are focusing on us. You thought that only black men like Willie Horton, O.J. Simpson, or Trayvon Martin were their targets. But now they're focusing on the most celebrated and respected black man in human history. They are testing us. If you want to know whether a man will oppose you, find something important to him and attack it. This is the test white supremacy's attack on Dr. King represents, and we are failing it. Black men, you are supposed to be speaking out, flooding message boards, making videos, posting blogs, and doing what you have to do to make it clear that we are through letting white people tell our story. The only black men who will survive, the only ones who deserve to survive, are the ones who stand up for themselves and start making moves. The time is now for black men to establish our own media geared towards intelligent black men. White supremacy is on the march. They're through being subtle about it. They're taking the fight straight to us. Now, which of you is going to fight back?